CPT or something. Yeah.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure they already did. But yeah, dude. We're gonna have to catch everybody up on. You're gonna have to catch me up a little bit too because I try, but I'm
Yeah.
like I've been focused, dude. I've been doing my Kushner research.
Mm,
And this one I'm writing right now, the second file is all about his like history and like his family and how he got started. Dude, he's a bitch. Like
yeah.
he's been his whole like role in life is like he's a little bitch. Like he's a fixer and he like his
Yeah.
dad called himself the Jewish Kennedy. Um
Wow. I didn't know
and he
that.
was like a mobster, dude, and he just like he groomed Jared to be basically his little bitch. And then Jared went and basically pissed away the family fortune, all of it. And so his whole everything he's ever done basically has been to like unfuck himself and his
Wow.
family. So it's very interesting, and I'm looking forward to sharing it. But it's crazy. Hello, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to Firebrands United. I'm back with my good friend Arturo Dominguez, and we got a whole continent to try and cover in an
I
hour,
mean,
and it's just
yeah.
not going to happen. But we will do our best. We will certainly do our best. So Jared looks like a little bitch. I agree. He does. He does. It's always nice to start our day shit talking Jared Kushner.
Yeah.
Um,
Right. Why not?
absolutely. He
Why not?
sucks. And yeah, I mean, at least he's not involved in the Latin American negotiations. He's too busy in the Middle East and colluding with Russia. So let's keep him over there. And I can't imagine he would make anything any better.
Right.
And speaking, I mean, of me and Arturo were talking just beforehand about how just this morning, some craziness appears to a full 360 after 20% of our Navy is now sitting in the Caribbean. Uh, what are your thoughts, dude, on this idea that now Trump is considering meeting with a terrorist leader, a leader of a terrifying and horrible cartel of that is Venezuela, the entire country, apparently. What's your take on that,
Yeah.
man? Just breaking news.
It's just, Trump mentioned something about having direct talks with Maduro, like what, last week, I believe it was. It was right
Yeah,
after they announced they were going to put the terrorist designation on him, and the what would you call it, the cartel de los soles that doesn't really
yeah,
exist, you know what I
yeah,
mean, like
yeah. Just
it's
like
just
Antifa.
right. Yeah, there you go. Right.
Antifa. It's
Venezuela's
Antifa. That's
yeah.
what it
Venezuela's Antifa, right? I mean, it's the same. It's the same concept. It's the
It's
same
crazy.
concept. So
Crazy.
yeah, it's interesting because I know, Maduro was like offering to step down a couple times,
Hmm.
and it's come up throughout the years, and like he presented like a 2-year type of transition plan where, like, he can, sit in for the next couple of years, his vice president finishes the term, and then, they have elections again. And the White House dismissed that as just, a letter full of lies, and just
Right.
they used all kinds of like derogatory stuff to kind of just say it's not serious. But
Hmm.
apparently now it's serious enough that, Donald Trump wants to have these talks. The problem I have with the whole situation, and I've been saying this a lot in the last couple of days, is it's not Maduro they want gone, right? It's the government. They want to throw out the whole idea of the Venezuelan government, which, the constitution under Chavez, includes black Venezuelans and indigenous Venezuelans and protections for all these different groups, whereas before it didn't. And a lot of those people feel seen, and that's why they kind of like the government in general, the way it's set up. Then a lot of people aren't necessarily fans of Maduro, but Like when we talk to people in Cuba, for example, they always reminisce about Castro. Well, in Venezuela, they always reminisce about Chavez.
Right.
And Maduro's not Chavez, dude. Like, I don't, Chavez was kind of a cool dude. I didn't agree with everything. I kind of liked where he was coming from, putting indigenous people first and things like that. Maduro's not that. He's kind of a weak dude. He talks a lot of trash. And I can see why people don't like him. But at the end of the day, when it comes to U.S. interventionism, Venezuelans like that even less. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah.
They're more than happy to deal with their own internal problems, maybe with some support from their neighbors, but not this interventionist. We dictate your government. We control who's your leader. Blah blah blah.
Really easy to unite people in face of an invader.
Yeah,
And the
yeah.
United States is acting
That's a
like an
great point.
invader, and
That's
they're
a great point.
flying bombers over, Venezuela. And yeah, it's crazy because Maduro, he literally offered to step down. Like, you can say what you will about him, the fact that he offered to step down, the
To
fact that
avoid a
he was
war.
right to avoid war. And it seems at this point, if I'm them, you saw, what's her name? She won the Nobel Prize.
Oh, Maria Corina Machado. Yeah.
Yeah, so she met with all of the foreign bankers or whatever,
Yep.
and basically talked about how they're going to divvy up Venezuela and sell it to foreign investors. Like, if I'm the people, of Venezuela, I don't want Maduro going anywhere. Like you said, like, it's easier to fix your own internal problems.
Right.
But they know that she's trying to sell their country. Like, they have the media that we have. Like, this is not like some third world country where, like, they don't have access to these things. Like, they know she met with them. They know these things. Like, I would be surprised at this point if they would be, even like, they're being invaded either way. Regime change, your country is being invaded, or literally they're going to invade you. But it seems that way.
Right. Everything that Maria Corina Machado is saying on TV in the US is being broadcast in Venezuela. Like, I mean, if you heard about it, they've heard about it 100 times. Because, I mean, let's think about it. If you were in the US and somebody was speaking like that about your country, the people defending your country are going to use that. Like, look, they're coming for us. See, they're going to propagandize it, and rightfully so, because she's not very well liked. She polls very low in Venezuela. And recently, I think it was yesterday, there's the Cuban hardliner, Maria Elvira Salazar from Miami. She was on Fox talking about how it's going to be a field day for oil companies and how there's trillions of dollars of economic benefit for the US in Venezuela. And she was all giddy and excited. And this was based on, she was saying that it's coming any minute now, it's coming. And right after she said that is when they sent those bombers from, the Midwest here in the US. They sent those bombers down there. And that was all, they even got me. I thought, oh shit, it's on. But that's psychological warfare. They put her on TV. They're like, the invasion is coming. It's inevitable. They send bombers down there and they scare the hell out of millions of people for nothing.
And then, you know what? Let's negotiate.
Right. And then now we want to negotiate, right? Because I
if
wonder.
I'm them,
right. I was wondering if sending.
Dude, seriously.
Yeah.
Like,
the bombers, like, they wanted to see if they can. I guess they wanted to see if they can, like, get Venezuela to do something, like shoot at one of those planes, and then it's war, and get Venezuela to react. And Venezuela's not going to. You know what I mean? They're not going to just walk into something like that. They know what they're up against.
Yeah.
And I think after that, maybe that's where the idea for negotiating came from, because they didn't react. So it's really hard to read at the moment, but it does feel inevitable, like something bad's about to happen.
It's interesting because I think it's like a test to see how far they're willing to go, in that sense. Because, like, yes, there's this idea of inevitability, and I do wonder And we were just talking about this beforehand about Xi Jinping's
Yeah,
comments about Taiwan yesterday. Whether or not this backpedaling is because, and I've said this many times, the United States cannot, despite what they want everyone to believe, fight two wars at once. It
right,
cannot do it. It's not possible,
right.
especially at the current state of our military, because we've been selling all of our stuff to Israel to kill people in Gaza.
Mm.
We gave a bunch of things to Ukraine, which I think was still the right call.
I do
I
too. I
don't
do
think,
too.
in terms of, helping and being complicit in a genocide. Yeah, well, now we are in a position where we can't, even if we had good reason to fight two wars at once. Which there really is very few justifiable reasons for war. The
Right.
only justifiable reason I could say for being in a foreign conflict would be to help Ukraine destroy Russia and make the world a better place. But God forbid we even consider doing that, or just selling them the bulk crap that we have. I digress. It shouldn't be our military equipment now being in the Caribbean, right? Where now it can't be quickly brought to China
Right.
and Taiwan. Maybe interesting to see if this become that, maybe this is them trying to minimize the embarrassment of a failure, because the people of Venezuela and Maduro, they didn't capitulate, they didn't take the bait, and
Right.
you
Right.
know
And I think, I don't know, you're touching on something here that honestly is a kind of a big deal. Supposedly 20% of our Navy is in the Caribbean, right?
crazy.
Nothing in that area is a threat to the United States, right? Nothing, not a damn thing. We brought the largest aircraft carrier, and legacy media has to remind us constantly that it's the biggest one in the world and it's in the
Big,
Caribbean.
so
But
big.
right, it's so big. But but yeah, to move it from the Mediterranean into the Caribbean is like the dumbest strategic move ever.
So
Like,
stupid.
so stupid. Like, why are you going to park it in between your own country and another continent which is attached to yours, and they're all your allies and your neighbors and your
No,
friends? Like,
stupid.
even if it is about drug smuggling, do we really need 20% of the Navy there? I mean, come on.
It's
Before
the
that,
Coast
they had
Guard, dude. It's what the Coast Guard's for.
right, right. That's exactly what the Coast Guard's for. The Coast Guard doesn't blow up boats though, so there's no theater there. There's no fun,
No,
I guess. But yeah, this whole thing, it just to see China reacting the way it's doing. I mean, it's a logical kind of conclusion, isn't it? Like, you take away a ton of your defenses, and of course somebody's going to say, hey, opportunity. I mean, granted, China's still surrounded by U.S. assets, um, but yeah, I don't. It just doesn't make any sense. It really doesn't. When you have so much, like we talked last week about how the U.S. has our troops operating out of 8 Colombian bases to
yeah,
fight drug
yeah.
trafficking, right? And drug trafficking just gets worse. But I mean, we already have military assets in the region that are trying to fight drug trafficking. So what do you need the Navy for? Like, none of it makes any logical sense, and I can't imagine how many billions they've spent on this little psychological warfare game. It's just stupid, and it's
You know,
backfiring. It's
it,
backfiring big time.
it costs. I want. It costs. I don't know. I'm gonna say a number, but I'm guessing it costs. Somewhere in the realm of, and this is probably low if you're in the Air Force, but like $50,000 to just fly an F-35 just once,
I
right? From
mean,
from takeoff to landing, it probably costs an absurd amount of money, and
yeah,
then you count the flight hours that they just put on the machine, okay, which shortens the lifetime of the equipment. Okay, like
maintenance. You have maintenance.
right. So what are they using these key resources for, this budget for, and it looks like this might be an embarrassment, because you think Maduro's going to he's also like you can say what you want about these dictators or whatever. He's smart enough to have made him gone from being a bus driver to
Yeah.
the leader of an entire country. Okay, he
Yeah.
also, if you and me are seeing these things, he's definitely seeing these things. And
Yeah.
if you think he's just going to come to the table knowing that China's leverage is his leverage,
Mm.
because he's
Yeah.
probably thinking that, maybe maybe they're not doing it because they can't and respond to China. And why are they invading Latin America? Because they want their resources to build their data centers. You know where all the chips come from to build their data centers? Taiwan.
Yeah.
What's more important to these people? Who's really, calling the shots? So I don't know. It's really interesting because Maduro, he sees these things that we're seeing.
Oh yeah. I mean, he has an intelligence apparatus, right? So he probably knows a lot more than we do.
Yeah, for sure. You're right.
Right.
Yeah.
So like, I mean, he's a leader of a nation. Chances are he knows a lot more than most of us. But yeah, it's crazy because you got me thinking, and I'm wondering if Xi Jinping said that yesterday to kind of draw the U.S. off Venezuela. Venezuela's a key asset for China.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it
They
could be.
sell all their oil to China,
Yeah, well,
right?
they sell a lot, quite
Yeah.
a bit of it goes to China. Yeah. And I mean, we still, and that's the thing. Like Maduro's not like trying to keep U.S. corporations out of Venezuela because I mean they have McDonald's down there, right? They have,
Yeah.
Chevron operates out of Venezuela, and just to give you an idea how the sanctions work down there, Chevron has to apply for a license from the U.S. government to buy oil from Venezuela. Like it makes you wonder, you start thinking, when did you inject yourself as a third party? It's not your oil. If they want to sell it to Chevron, let them sell it to Chevron.
Right.
It benefits us economically, and that's kind of what's happening now. You have ExxonMobil drilling in the disputed waters off the Venezuela Guyana coast, which they're doing against a court order, as the courts decide who those disputed waters belong to. So it's a really complicated situation for the United States. You can't just go in there and start dropping bombs. You might hit Chevron's assets. You might hit ExxonMobil. You know what I mean? You might hit McDonald's. You know what I'm saying? Like they
Not the
might be
golden arches.
right.
No.
They might be pissed about that. You can buy Coca-Cola in Venezuela. It's not.
Yeah.
The sanctions are there, but corporations simply just. I mean, I say simply. It's a lot more complicated, but they have to get a license to do business. And the United States controls that, and at any time the US can just revoke all those licenses, shut the spigot off, and everybody's screwed. They won't, because everything the US does is based on its corporate interests, right? So you go back to the word banana republic. The phrase banana republic came from when the Chiquita banana scandal happened in Latin America, and they paid like for like military and terrorist organizations from like 97 to 2004
To
to
leave
keep
their stuff alone,
yeah to
basically.
keep countries destabilized so they can exploit labor. They were paying people shit wages, basically slave wages. And this is the same thing. Everything is US corporate backed. So I think a lot of the times when you see these people on TV talking about how much value there is in invading Venezuela, I think they're trying to sell that idea on U.S. corporate interests. Like, once corporations say, yeah, man, this is going to be great for us, let's do it. I think we do it. I mean, I think that's what happened with Iraq and Halliburton and
Yeah.
Afghanistan. It's all the same narrative every time.
Yeah, it's just like, it's one of the things I think about. It's like, it's not just like America's capitalism poisoning America. American capitalism poisons the world, dude. Like it ruins like, if you think about it, it's like, I think capitalism is kind of like a virus, and it spreads, and there's like, unless you like inoculate people, right? Unless you like, regulation is the vaccine, it's just going to keep going. And we're starting to see that. It's like, and like, I'd be more worried if the regime change in Venezuela was successful because, yeah, they have American companies there now, but when someone's like, I think it was the IMF or whatever she was meeting with, but like when they're talking about how they're going to straight up divvy up an entire country's economy, with the person who would replace that person, who also received the Nobel Peace Prize. So now I'm questioning
crazy.
everything about the Nobel. That's the, but yeah, I mean, I think that this is interesting. I think that Venezuela in all of this is something to keep an eye on, and I think this negotiations could very much be we need to save face before we pull and move assets. So I think the thing to watch is not what they say, but if things leave the
Yeah,
Caribbean.
right.
That'll be your indicator as to if it is Taiwan, if they quietly move ships
Yeah.
towards the Pacific. I think that would be um, the thing to watch.
Yeah, I would breathe a sigh of relief because they've made it very well known that after Venezuela, it's Nicaragua, Cuba, Colombia, and that's what bothers me. You're going to destabilize an entire region for no reason.
Well,
You
it's
take
exploitation. That's
right. Well, yeah,
that's the
right,
reason.
right. For greed, right.
Yeah, yeah,
But like getting rid of Maduro, I see getting rid of Maduro a lot like getting rid of Saddam Hussein.
mm,
As bad as he was, he scared his neighbors. He scared a lot of people, and because he was right in the middle, he kept the peace because people were
yeah,
afraid of what he might do. Maduro's not quite the aggressor like that because Venezuela hasn't ever invaded another country. Period. They're a defensive country. Period. Most Latin America is. They call the Caribbean the zone of peace for that reason because everybody's has a defensive posture, not an offensive posture. But you get rid of him, cartel wise, crime wise, corruption wise, and not saying that Maduro's government isn't corrupt because they all are. Um, you take him out of the picture, you take their government out of the picture, and it's just going to be a power vacuum. People are going to be fighting for control. People are going to be, trying to exert their, influence on things, and the U.S. is going to back a lot of it, and that's what's scary because, like, a lot of Iraqis don't want the U.S. in Iraq anymore, and we're still there. So, that's essentially what's going to happen. We're going to plant our flag, build some bases, and then you can never get rid of us. And
you
that's
know,
kind of the idea, I guess.
you said something, and in regards to the cartel and the cartel, and I think it's one of the things I want to ask you is you've seen a lot of these countries. A good example is Chile, right? You're seeing a rise in the cartel in Chile. There was never a thing, dude. Like there, and then you start to see them in like the last, probably 5 or 6 years, crossing in from Colombia, right? And kidnapping and killing people up there. Peru, right? They just had they tried to do a full military crackdown on the cartel,
Yeah.
and they lost. It looks like they're not winning, and that, I'm curious, what are your thoughts? I mean, it really seems like decades and decades of probably US backed in some capacity or in minimally endorsed. It seems like the cartel are on the verge, and these gangs, crime, whatever, because a lot of these gangs actually, like the Sinaloa cartel, they've expanded into Latin America. And it seems like the cartel could very well, maybe even topple governments if things continue, especially if Peru uses its military and still, loses. Like, what is your take on that concept in the region, and just the power of the cartels?
Yeah, cartels certainly have the money and the power for, say, an electoral type coup, like through elections.
Mm,
That's certainly something to consider. I think that like what Peru is doing, Mexico proved that is a failure. Mexico's military still goes after cartels. They do it more, clandestinely, as opposed to before when it was all out war on the streets. I think if you don't address the underlying issues that make cartel life appealing, um, you lose, right? And I think that's what AMLO and Scheinbaum's approach is to provide economic freedom, a better way, more income, easier access to housing, and what you would call, I guess, a normal life, something outside of crime. It and those policies have brought crime down in Mexico drastically, right?
Yeah.
So cartels are still a problem. They're not going to go away overnight. But I think that if you undermine their recruitment efforts by providing people a better outcome, by being a productive member of society, then that's where you start hurting the cartels, right? If we did that in the United States, and where people didn't rely on drugs just to cope every day, we would undermine cartels in the same way. Getting into bloodbath type situations like Mexico used to do, and what Peru is doing now is essentially a civil war, because sometimes you're gonna not gonna win all those. You're gonna lose a lot of times. These cartels are heavily armed. Most of their weapons come from the U.S. Most of their ammo comes from the U.S. All their military weapons are U.S. made.
Yeah.
That's not by accident, right? All of our Haiti, all these weapons in Haiti. And for the U.S., it's beneficial to have these cartels running rampant because it destabilizes countries. And as soon as a country becomes destabilized, then we start manufacturing pretexts. Then we start trying to get involved in their elections and in their, just the other day, the U.S. got called out for meddling in Honduras's upcoming elections. I reported on that last night. It came out this morning.
You fill me in on that. I missed that.
Yeah,
Give
so
us a update.
it's every election in every country. There's always some confusion. There's misinformation. People talking trash about the other candidates, whatever. And some people in Honduras have made certain accusations towards other people, and there's a lot of investigations going on between these authorities and all this stuff. Last week, though, Maria Elvira Salazar, the Cuban lady from Miami, the hardliner who thinks she should get in everybody's business, held a subcommittee hearing in Congress about Honduras. And suspiciously, it was broadcast in Honduras, right? The whole thing was her politicking for her preferred candidate. He's like, I'm not telling you who to vote for, but this person's evil and this person's just as bad and this guy's real name, and then she talks nice about the one guy, right?
Mm.
The whole thing was a staged op, dude. It was obvious. I have the clips, the whole thing in my article.
Send it over to me. I'll link it in the
out.
show notes today.
Yeah.
After the post.
Okay, and so luckily, right next to her, Joaquin Castro was sitting there, and he did kind of promote the idea of, there's all this voter suppression stuff going on, but then he ends his statement with saying more Hondurans are mobilized to vote, this time than in a long time. So I'm like, you just kind of negated your whole they're being suppressed. But what was really important about Joaquin Castro's part was he questioned one guy in there who's a foreign agent, a registered foreign agent. And you don't see those in committee hearings.
Yeah.
So he started questioning the guy, and it turns out he's a registered foreign agent for like 7 different countries. His company also has a ton of business interests in Honduras.
Huh.
Those business interests have been politicking for one specific candidate, which just so happens to be Salazar's favorite candidate in Honduras. All this was part of the hearing. And hey, you know what? Fault Castro for agreeing with Salazar on the whole voter suppression thing, but give him mad props for he used his whole 5 minutes roasting this dude about being a paid foreign agent, about having business interests in Honduras, and dude was getting angry. And he tried to justify it. Just because I'm involved with this and that doesn't mean that we're doing that. Whatever, dude. Like, we see you. That same guy, for the record, remember, I don't know if you remember the coup in Bolivia where Elon Musk said we're allowed to coup whoever we want. that paid for an agent that was at that hearing was behind that coup when he was at OAS, the Organization of the American States. And despite no irregularities being reported in that election in Bolivia, he pushed OAS and the State Department to push a narrative of voting irregularities that led to the coup of Evo Morales. What
Yeah.
was particularly funny about that is in the very next election, 80% of Bolivia voted Morales back in. And I'm like, and then all these classified docs start coming out, and this same guy who's trying to interfere in Bolivia's elections at this hearing, or in Honduras's elections at this hearing, was part of the coup in Bolivia. And I'm just like, and he's in Congress testifying on the record, and they're broadcasting this into Honduras. I'm like, dude, I published that article, and so many people from Honduras were thanking me for calling out that hearing in
Hell yeah.
particular, because two of the three candidates, the two that Salazar hates, called the U.S. out for meddling. And that's when I was like, wait, what do you mean meddling? So I started looking into it, and I stumbled on that subcommittee hearing from last week, which made no news anywhere. Of course not, right? We're sitting here meddling in an election publicly in Congress, and nobody says a word about it. And it's just crazy to me. It's great to see that happen. So, when you see that, you should start doubting what our media was saying about the last election in Venezuela and that election in Bolivia and every other election in Latin America, because they lie constantly, and
Yeah.
they manufacture evidence to support those lies. It's so crazy to me that people don't see that.
Another, I think it's interesting, like after, they oust this guy, 80%,
Yeah,
of people, and it was Bolivia, right?
yeah,
That vote him back in. Another interesting thing that happened this week, Bolsonaro,
mm,
they
yeah,
rearrested him.
yeah,
Okay. Because Trump was going to meet with him. People are suggesting that Trump was going to try and get him out
yeah.
of, Brazil. What's your take on that? I think it appears to me like this is another, it seems like globally, and maybe we can touch on this a little bit too. This G20 vote that went against Trump as well, but it seems to me like this was a rebuff on the part of Brazil against Trump. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, for the record, I missed out on a lot of the G20 stuff because my head's been spinning in Latin America and
Oh, it's all good.
immigration stuff, right? But no, that this whole thing, like, I read the translated version of what Bolivian authorities had to say, and dude, according to them, it really does seem like there was some sort of plot to help Bolsonaro escape Brazil. And the dude should consider himself lucky that he was on house arrest.
Dude, I know.
Now he's in prison, and prison is no picnic in Brazil. I assure
Yeah,
you, it is not a picnic in Brazil. I'm not sure what kind of protection they could offer that guy, but
and probably not much.
right, and it seems like they have dirt, like, so they revoked his house arrest and threw him in prison. So I mean, obviously they had enough for the courts to agree to that. Um, but yeah, it is definitely interventionism on the U.S.'s part, and due to the incompetence of the White House, they can't do anything secretly. Trump just blurting out the CIA's in Venezuela. I'm like, you fucking moron! Like, not anymore.
Yeah, no shit. Now they're looking. They
Yeah,
weren't looking,
right.
but now they're, they were probably looking, but now they're really looking.
Yeah,
All
exactly.
those people that had like a yellow flag, now those are red flags.
Right.
So
No kidding. So
you
yeah, I
know,
don't, it's definitely interventionism. And my first reaction really went into the whole Christian nationalism thing. I just can't get away from that because Bolsonaro was an avowed Christian nationalist, big time Christian nationalist. And
what's
I should say is, not was.
yes, still currently is in
Yeah,
prison,
but
still a Christian nationalist,
right.
in the
And
jumpsuit in
you
prison.
you look at you look at like Rubio's agreement that he made with Ecuador and Noboa. He's not an avowed Christian nationalist, the president of Ecuador. He does, pal around with a lot of Christian nationalists. He's supported by a lot of Christian nationalist groups. So, there's that whole appeasement thing. that I think that's part of it too. I think a lot of these Latin American leaders who are embracing Christian nationalists is like an appeasement thing for the Christian nationalists here because we have so many in government, and that's one way for them to garner support from the U.S. Nayib Bukele in El Salvador, he embraced Christian nationalism for no reason. He's not a Christian nationalist, but he did so. And I think when it comes to Bolsonaro, I do think that played a role. I really do think that played a role, particularly with a lot of people in the White House, because there are a lot of Christian nationalists, white nationalists, fucking flat out racists and shit in the White House right now. So it's pretty crazy. But yeah, I saw some stuff about the G20.
The interesting thing, I really honestly is Argentina was part of the
Yeah.
negotiations, and they're not a top 20 economy by any standard, so they're not on the panel per se, but a lot of countries are welcome to be part of that. And it was very interesting to see that actually they pulled all the way out right before they were involved, and then they backed all the way off. And I guess my question to you is, at this point, how integrated do you think Malay's government is into the whatever this United States Christian nationalism oligarch nexus?
I mean, definitely. I mean, pretty deep. A lot of what Malay did in Argentina is driving Trump policy. Elon Musk backed it. Taking, shutting off social programs. There when it comes to Argentina, right? Trump is trying to mimic a lot of that, a lot of what El Salvador did. With the whole crackdowns and stuff.
Mm.
But with Argentina, like you're seeing a lot of conservatives brag because Argentina's economy is, inflation is dropping, things like that, right? What they're not talking about is how devalued their currency still is, even after a $40 billion infusion. They're also not talking about how Malay also cut funding to programs for like 6,000, 6,500. They call them popular communities. They're working class neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And 5 million people live in those. And like something like 90% don't have access to fresh water.
Yeah. Yeah. I
60%,
read that.
right. 60% have like homeboy hookups to the electric grid, which is dangerous as hell. And he cut funding for all that. So he cut funding for fuel subsidies, which help with electricity, gas, for your car and stuff like
Public
that.
transport, right?
Right, right.
Also, yeah.
So, okay, so the economy is seeing a little bit of an improvement, but the poorest Argentinians are having to pay more just to live, which means they can buy less groceries, which means they have less access to food, less access to a lot of things, transportation, things like that. So, if Trump were to impose those kind of policies here, which he's already trying to do with food stamps and Medicaid, trying to cut all these services, it's inevitable that the result is going to be the same, right? Our poorest are going to be poorer. Are the people that are on the verge of or on the edge of middle class and poverty are going to be poorer. It's sad that in the richest country in the world, 15 million kids don't know where their next meal is coming from.
Yeah.
That's more than the population of Cuba. So it's more than the population of a lot of countries. When you have 45 million people who rely on food stamps just to get by, that's a failure of society. And to villainize any other country who has numbers like that or similar or less, fewer numbers of poverty than we do, it's kind of a slap in the face. We do much worse to our own people than some so-called dictators do.
For real.
And that's the unfortunate reality. For us to be the shining star of democracy, anytime we commit a war crime like killing people in the Caribbean, we're setting a standard, right?
Yeah.
The rest of the world is like, look, the shining beacon of democracy does it. It must be legit to do, So it's a very duplicitous and hypocritical situation that we find ourselves in, and it just blows me away that that Argentina and I mean, is serving as an example of the harm these policies can do. It's deeply embedded with the White House, And we're a much bigger country, so those policies are going to have a much bigger impact than Argentina.
Yeah. You know, in as we're talking about, all these different elections, we have, and you reported on this actually, um, and in Chile, you have
Oh,
presidential elections going on right now, and the runoff elections are next month, right? This
yeah,
November.
December. Yeah,
So, even if you consider right now the party is the Communist Party of Chile, that's the party, but they're actually more of a socialist type
right.
of
They
government.
call
So
themselves communists, but they're yeah. I don't.
yeah,
Yeah. So
it's I was
democratic
reading about it.
socialist.
Their policies are more socialist. Like I've
Right.
I've been there. It is not like comrade this, comrade that. Like that is not, like yeah, that's not how it works. But what is interesting is, you have the favored Jose Antonio Cast. You were talking about this. His dad's a literal fucking Nazi.
Yeah.
And his brother was like a crazy, nationalist governor, I believe. And, you have him tying with, Janet Yara, I
Yeah.
think is
Yeah.
that. And so she's winning marginally. She squeaked out like a couple percentage points higher, I believe, than cost. But this guy, his rhetoric is literally identical to Trump's rhetoric. I mean, like if
Yeah.
you look at what
MLA.
he's
Yeah.
saying, it's like he just took it and he's using it there. And I think that it kind of might work, unfortunately, because of that thing we were talking about earlier with these cartels coming in from Colombia. This is a country where you really didn't have to worry about getting kidnapped and murdered. And suddenly, you have this. I mean, are you concerned about the outcomes of these elections or?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's not every day you're looking at a potentially literal Nazi taking over a country. It's the
God, dude.
scariest shit ever.
Yeah, man.
I think the one of the deciding factors in that election is going to be their proposed approaches to tackling these cartels. The thing is with Cast, the Nazi, he is blaming, of course, Venezuelan migrants, Peruvians,
Mm,
he's blaming migrants basically. Again, it really boils down to the underlying issues when it comes to the cartels. Is you have to address those economic problems first and foremost. I think that after the election, a lot of people predicted Katz would win, mainly because there were more votes for conservative type, even more moderate conservative type candidates. I think there were 7 than there were for more liberal or communist candidates. But I think at the end of the day, those moderates in the middle that may have voted conservative might shift because they're afraid of the Nazi, right? The nationalists. I mean,
yeah.
it could definitely play a role. And I've never been one to be like, posting something on social media asking people in Chile if they're really going to vote for a Nazi, but I feel like I want to. I'm not
Yeah,
trying
but
to. I'm not
yo,
trying to swing an election, but I'm like, hey, man, like, are y'all really considering voting for a Nazi? Like, what the
hey, Chileans, what's up? What's
right?
going on down there? Are you really trying to be like, are you down for a Reich? Like, is that what you want? Like, no, y'all are just playing, right? I think you might be right though, in the sense that, it when you hold those other candidates, like if they really wanted the conservative vote, they probably would have voted for him, right?
Yeah,
Like they would have voted for him, um,
and not a more
and,
moderate, right? Right.
and not the moderate. So, are they really that committed to? the whatever their side is, and you mentioned he's blaming the Peruvians and Colombian
And
migrants.
Venezuelans, right? There's a lot of
Sorry,
Venezuelans.
Venezuelan. Interesting to mention that they actually share a border with Argentina,
Mm.
and he's not blaming the Argentinians.
Right.
Argentina.
It's like the fourth largest border in the world. I mean, it's huge. It's almost Latin America from top to bottom, you know? So yeah, that's an interesting thing. The other thing I was hoping for too is, since they have such a big border, I hope that Chileans look over the border and see what's happening to,
Mhm.
the general population there, because one of the big problems, like in Bolivia, is the same as in Argentina and the same as in Chile, is the laws and for corporations. Basically, all the laws in Bolivia favor the 10 wealthiest families.
Mhm.
In Argentina, it's a what? I mean, you've been there. What, two, three families, four families, something like that.
It's
Chile,
it's an
yeah,
oligarchy for sure. It's also
right,
like mining is like basically where all
right,
the money is. So my understanding is that basically the way the country works, it's the same in like Peru, all these places, like because
right.
their major exports is mining. So the companies come in, they're foreign companies, they make arrangements with these probably 10 or so wealthy families, but like 2% of profits stay in the country. It's one of the reasons Argentina is so poor, because all of this money and all these places, they just funnel it right out of the country. And this is probably due to the fact that U.S. interventionism, and these countries have
Right.
been struggling against this for decades.
Yeah.
Probably over 100 years. At this point, because Monroe Doctrine and going all the way back to that. It's been an ongoing thing, and resource extraction is not new. I would
Yeah.
say the demand per se might just be more resurgent, so you're seeing a new wave because we know the actors behind Trump really want to build data centers. It's why, like, in every agreement they signed, even with Malay, the
Yeah.
invest those things are outlined. The data centers are a priority everywhere. There's a reason.
Yeah.
Um,
There's a clip in one of my articles. I can't remember which one, but the former head of Southern Command, Southcom, did a talk like an hour long or so, and one of the things she mentioned, it was how resource rich Latin America is, and the first thing she mentioned was fresh water.
mm,
And how that's how Latin America has like 30% of the world's fresh water or whatever, something like that. And then you hear Maria Corina Machado shortly after she won the Nobel talking about just that, data centers. And I thought to myself, immediately thought back to the fresh water comment, and then thought when I heard her say data centers, and I thought, holy shit, And yeah, you're right. No, I mean they're talking data centers, they're talking about AI, they're talking about bringing all that stuff there, and that's resource extraction, right? Like all our U.S. companies are going to be running their AI using up fresh water in Latin America instead of here, and that's what we're doing. We're stealing.
because we don't have any more fresh water for them to
Right.
extract in all these crazy in the deserts and in like the wastes, right? Everywhere in the middle, they've tapped all the groundwater in these places, right? Like
Yeah.
it's something they've been doing for a while, and the fact of the matter is they haven't even been doing this that long. So the fact that
Right.
they're already like out. What I will say, I think these countries tend to have going for them is they are not shy, revolution shy. They are not
Right.
worried to overthrow their government. Here in America, we're like super averse to like,
Yeah.
regime change. And, Argentina, they've been doing it every 50 years. They're like, reset, reset.
Yeah.
So, if Javier Milei is going to force these people into absolute destitution and poverty, you better believe they're not going to just sit there and take it.
Yeah. The most dangerous population is a hungry population.
Mhm.
So yeah, he's going down that path. He is going down that path. So is Trump.
Yeah.
They're all going down that path, and it's so scary to see, because how far are they going to go? How far does this go globally?
I I think it's one of those things where I think that is the question, and I think it's entirely linked to us. That's where I
Yeah.
think like it's all on us.
Yeah.
Like we look around, we see what they're doing in Latin America. We want it to stop. You stop Trump and you arrest these billionaires that are illegally, funding a government coup, right? Like, like you jail Peter Thiel and all of these tech dudes and you take their money away, you take their power away, you take BlackRock and you freaking freeze all their assets until we figure out how much of that is stolen CIA money, like from drug smuggling, like
Right.
and all the you stop funding Israel, the Palestinian genocide ends overnight. Okay, like it's on us. Like, and that's the thing I like why I think talking about geopolitics and what you do is so important because it's our fault. It's our
Right.
fault.
Right.
Like
And
we do it.
it's also also all connected, right? So everything that's happening here in the U.S. with ICE and everything, one of if you look at a common theme in my work, and people often give me shit because I'm one day I'm Latin America, the next day I'm immigration, back and forth. The common theme in that is Latinos, right? Everything that affects us, Latinos, here, back home, where our families are, it's all interconnected, right? The way ICE is coming after Latinos, the way cops target Latinos, almost as much as black people, not quite. That's not an accident. They go after black people for a reason. They go after Latinos for a reason, and it's all interconnected. And when you talk about the geopolitics of what we do, it helps expose what we do at home. Because it's police state, it's surveillance state, it's all these things. It's about exerting power. It's about forcing people to act a certain way. Wasn't just Scott Bessent on TV talking about how we need to dress better? Like, dude, fuck off. I mean,
I'll wear my lounge shorts and my
yeah,
Crocs if I want to, Scott.
yeah, like screw you, dude. Like, no, you know what a nonconformist is? Because most of us are nonconformists like that. Shit. Yeah, like that's what it's about. I read an article just
And
today.
how dare you not wear a suit on my podcast? What is
Yeah,
going on?
yeah. Where's the suit? Damn it. No, but like I read an article today from a government funded media outlet in Cuba. Right, they're talking about white nationalism, and Christian nationalism particularly, and this whole conversation we're having, right, with it in Latin America and all this stuff, and the perspective from that. I didn't share it because it's Cuban government website, right? It's propaganda most of the time,
Yeah.
but their perspective was, with the current wave of white nationalists, is what they're looking for is a non-denominational, uh, morally kind of obscure, unregulated government, much like their religion, right? Morally ambiguous, non-denominational, where as long as it's Christian in some way, you know, that's how they framed this article, and it was really long. And the more I read it, and how they were equating it to the same movements we're talking about, with the white nationalism or Christian nationalism in Latin America, I started looking around here in the US, and the whole non-denominational, morally ambiguous, unregulated, that's the path we've been on since Reagan.
I know
That
Reagan. I was not alive during Reagan. I never knew Reagan. So I don't have the Reagan bias that a lot of people have, because
bad.
Reagan was probably the most successful American propaganda
Oh yeah.
operation the world has ever seen when they convinced the middle class to give away all of their money to rich people. But if you just look back to the Heritage Foundation, who was the first Trump? It was Reagan.
Yeah.
Reagan was the first Trump. Trump is just an ugly orange Reagan, because I guess they had to try a lot less hard the second time around, because it looks like Russia was helping them with X announcing. I'm sure you caught this, where X like turned on the location feature, and it turns out like 2/3 of all the MAGA accounts are in like Russian linked countries, like straight out of like Eastern Europe and in Africa and like
Macedonia,
Africa.
Ethiopia,
Yeah.
like,
So
dude,
these are all
what?
Russia heavy influence countries. So, you're looking at Russia's been trying to destabilize the United States forever. And it's, Christian nationalism. And, people say, I think people who are Christians in a traditional sense, where they like actually like, think what Jesus said was what you should live by. In the very same way that the term Republican has been hijacked by fascist,
Yeah.
I think Christian has been hijacked by Christian nationalism.
Yeah.
I grew up, and I have no religion. Okay, I'm just me. And I don't have a negative bias towards someone who practices a faith. Yet
Right.
in my life experience, I've had a hard time not associating a certain negative bias towards other people with Christians. And it's not fair to Christians. And it's not fair to true conservatives, people who just believe the Constitution. Like, in practice, a conservative in me should agree in that the government should do government things and not give a shit about what you look like, what your skin color is, what language you speak, who you marry.
Right.
That's what a conservative government is. It should regulate where it needs to regulate. It should stay out of people's business. And but like, now you have Christians, true people who are Christians, who just want to practice a moral code, I think, and do
Yeah.
something that live by a certain way. Now they get this bad reputation because of Christian nationalism, and it affects people like me in my growing up, and me having to learn that you actually have to differentiate the people that are saying they're Christian but are actually just fascists and racists, with
Right.
people who actually practice a faith, and they just leave you alone and practice their own faith. And
Yeah, yeah, like we have a lot of fundamentalists, right, in this country that are like die hard about their religion and stuff. But then you have the racists and the bigots who hide behind Christianity, like the Klan did. And I always think to myself, I try to picture what Jesus's face would look like if he came across a burning cross. You know what I'm saying? In a black man's front yard. You know what I mean? Like, he would be horrified, dude. Like, who the
yeah, dude.
hell? What makes you think you're Christian? You're burning a cross, dude. It's like an oxymoron. Like, it
Yeah,
doesn't
right
even
after
make.
your lynch mob, dude, like you burn
Right,
the cross.
right.
Dude.
It's so.
And it's crazy because I wrote about this. And you can say whatever you want about the societal side of racial violence. Statistically, there is zero reporting on racial violence coming out of the states that are historically the most, um, you know, uh, renowned for racial violence. And essentially they've just legalized racial violence as
Pretty much.
police, but they don't report on it. But if you look at like the rate of suicides in the black population in these states, for example, Georgia and Missouri, where you had Trey Reed, the
Mm,
suicide by hanging is way higher than it should be in
right.
a certain subset of the population. In fact, if you look at it from that perspective, it's actually getting worse, and it's gotten worse since 2016. You see a
Yeah.
trend where it's going up and up, and racial violence is higher than it's ever been. Extremely downplayed in the media, but
Big time.
the fact remains that they're like, oh well, the FBI has this database, it's mandated. Well, the reporting is optional,
It
and
is
they're
right. It's
reporting like
voluntary.
zero, or they're just not reporting at all. So you see Christian nationalism, and that is what Christian nationalism is it's what's driving racial violence like wildfire. Like, probably the KKK, just they don't wear the hoods anymore. That doesn't
Yeah.
mean they're not the KKK. They
Right.
just can get away with it, like, oh, the coroner says it's suicide by hanging. He broke even though he's like, all of his bones are broken, and his
Right.
legs are broken, he hung himself. Yeah, how did he get up there and hang himself if his legs were broken?
Yeah. It's like that. There was a migrant recently found in a detention facility hanging, and his hands and feet were bound. Yeah. How did that happen?
Yeah, they're killing. That's the thing
Yeah.
about ICE, dude. Is they're killing these people. Like,
Oh,
we've talked about this before. Where did those 1,000 men go, dude? Like, it's
yeah.
not talked about enough. And dude, I wish, like, sometimes I wish, like, I could it's my goal for the Firebrand Project is to grow it to a point where, like, it can basically become an investigative think tank. Like,
Yeah.
I would love to go down there and, hire some, dude missing all of his teeth on an airboat and try and find the truth about what happened to those people, because they deserve, those 1,000 people, they deserve people to know, what, but
Yeah.
there's not, like, you're a bandwidth trying to cover an entire continent, dude. Like, there's not enough people doing what you do. And like, it's why I want to have this conversation with you. It's why I wanted to touch on all these different countries, because, I want my base, in the firebrands who don't get, insight into Latin America, to be exposed to these things, because it is a huge part of what this government, this regime is doing, is meddling in Latin America. It's a huge part of their efforts, because they think it's easy pickings.
Right.
They
And
don't have to fight, against China or Russia or,
right.
anywhere to do this.
Yeah, I think the way we're presenting it too, and I'm intentional in the way I talk about these things, because not everybody knows all the details and all the little things and all that I know, right? And I can't expect them to know.
Mm-hmm.
So I try to explain it in simplest ways possible, and I try not to delve too or dwell too much on the history aspect of it, because the last thing you want people to do is tune out. You get a lot of the punditry on cable news and all over the place, and they just start rambling and going on. And I think the focus needs to be more on the now, like what we're doing now, like getting caught trying to manipulate Honduras's elections, for example, exposing these lies about Venezuela. You know, I think these things are important to discuss in these ways, because it's what's happening now. It's how we can impact the future,
Yeah.
right? We can talk about the past, sure, and I mention it in passing all the time because it is important. But I try not to focus on too much of the history part, because the idea is to try to get this government to shift course, to do something different. It really pains me to think, not just because I have family in Cuba and Cuba's going to be a target, but I know what Venezuelans must feel like here, and I know what Venezuelans at home must feel like. A lot of my family, a lot of the people I've interviewed over the years in Cuba are really scared of what the U.S. might do with all that military, because the way these ships are stationed, a lot of them kind of go around the eastern tip of Cuba, and they're right there. You can see them, and you have Guantanamo right
Yeah.
there. So, yeah, a lot of people are nervous. A lot of people are scared. And honestly, if the U.S. quietly moves their ships the hell out of there, I could breathe a sigh of relief.
Absolutely.
But it does. I do think that how we present this and how we talk to people is extremely important. And I think what you're doing is exceptional, dude. Like you do
Thanks,
a
bro.
really good job. And I try to watch as much of your stuff as possible, but
It's all
there's a
good.
lot of us,
Yeah,
and
there is.
trying
Like,
to support everybody is a job in itself, sort of. Plus we have to keep doing our work. So,
yeah. No, that's why
I,
this is important, though. That's why, like, I do this, because, like, not only is it important for them to understand what's going on, but it helps me do my job better,
right,
because I can't be an expert in Latin American
right,
politics. I definitely am more informed than probably 90%, 95% of people on the comings and goings. Like, I can ask somewhat, targeted questions to help. But like this is what you do, man. This is
yeah,
your profession. This is your lane, and um, I'm grateful to have you as a colleague and as a
yeah.
friend,
Likewise.
and to be able to lean on you as a resource to help share things with people, as well. So, everybody, if you look here on the screen, Decolonized Journalism, that's Arturo's Substack. So make sure you go and subscribe to him. You can also click on the little names up here in the top left-hand corner. Go subscribe to Arturo. Like, he does great work, and he's right on the money. So,
Appreciate it, bro.
I tagged him in something the other day. Like, we were talking about Chile's elections. I'm like, Arturo, like, what's up with this? He's like, I'm writing it. Don't worry. And
Yeah, I
I was like,
remember.
thank God. Okay, I'll be able to see what's going on. And like, I would never have found out that guy was a Nazi, but
Yeah,
Arturo, he was able, like, so that's where the value is. And if you want to really know what's going on in Latin America, what's going on with ICE, how Latinos and the Black community is being treated in America, he's the guy to look into. So
appreciate it, bro.
make sure you subscribe to him, support him. And same goes for me. If you want
Hell yeah.
to, get the geopolitical aspect and kind of, maybe those more niche news stories to tie it together, that's what I do as well. And you subscribe to me, you get to see Arturo every Friday because he's on the rant. So that's just another good reason to subscribe to us both. But
There you go.
Arturo, bro, thank you for joining me today.
Appreciate
It's
you
been a
having me, man.
pleasure. And you'll see us both back probably in the next couple weeks. I try to get Arturo on here every couple weeks because I always like to check in on our neighbors to the south because it's important. Like you said, it's all connected. And so, guys, everybody in the chat, thank you so much for joining us today for today's Firebrands United. Make sure you share this live stream with your friends, and make sure you text it. You say, hey, like, you should catch up on what's going on in Latin America. It's important. And what we tried to do today was give you and I think we did a pretty good job of giving
I think
you a
so.
pretty solid macro view of what's going on down there. So make sure you share this live stream with them. And with that said, burn bright, resist, and we'll talk to you all later.
All right, man.